Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. And we need to talk. We need to talk about black box warnings on hormones for women in menopause. And I'll touch on oral contraceptives a bit. So here's the thing. This is not new, but this is now kind of coming to a crescendo. It's coming to a head. And that is the effort to get rid of the black box warning on modern day estrogen. They're not even so modern day. We'll say not the old Prempro days, hormone therapy for menopausal women. So, what are we talking about? Well, just a few days ago, a committee met with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to try to make their case that the black box warning that is on all products with estrogen related to menopausal therapy should be removed, that they don't make sense. Now, the focus is going to begin with vaginal estrogen products, but it's not just that. It's also going to incorporate other products as well. But the most likely success will begin with a vaginal estrogen product. And I'll tell you why in a few seconds. So let's go back and say, well, what is a black box warning on hormone products? What's a black box warning at all? Well, the FDA puts on what is called a black box warning on pharmaceuticals that are deemed to have excessive levels of risk, like levels that could result in serious harm, even death. So they have a big black box on the box that you would get with the product, on the information labeling. So it's going to be highly visible if you look at anything that comes in with the product or that is on the box that contains the product. So black box warnings put on these pharmaceuticals by the FDA are designed to warn the consumer that there are serious risks involved in taking this pharmaceutical, and you need to be sure you're aware of them and discuss them with your provider to make sure that the risks are countered by benefit. And what happened was back in the early 2000s, so it came to a head and ended the first part of the Women's Health Initiative study in 2002. And that is what triggered the placement of the black box warning, which went on the products, the menopausal hormone products, the very next year in 2003. So, what is this all about? Well, the Women's Health Initiative was this very large, funded by taxpayers, an NIH study that involved thousands of women from age 50 up to 79 at the initiation of the study, with 90% of the women being over the age of 59, with the average age at 63. Now, the purpose of this study was to try to see if giving hormones in this somewhat older age group, women that were not allowed to have night sweats or hot flashes, because then it would be clear what group they got in, the placebo group or the hormone group. So they didn't want them to have any clear-cut symptoms of menopause. They were theoretically supposed to be healthy, but we know that wasn't true. They couldn't get enough thousands of women who were in pristine, perfect health. So these women had the whole array of metabolic dysfunctions, insulin resistance, hypertension, some vascular disease, but they could not have had a previous heart attack or stroke. That was really an exclusion factor. So in this study, they were given conjugated equine estrogen, and most of them, but not all of them, were also given a progestin, like a fake mimic of progesterone, not real progesterone that the body would ever have in it, called medroxyprogesterone acetate. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details, but the study was stopped early with the combination of the progestin, MPA, medroxyprogesterone acetate, with the conjugated equine estrogen. That was the estrogen product, also known by the brand name of Premarin, which was derived from pregnant horse urine, hence the name Premarin for pregnant mare, okay? That's where that name derived. And the estrogen that was put in this study that was combined with the medroxyprogesterone acetate is not an estrogen that would ever be naturally found in a human female body. In fact, the horse was trying to get rid of it. It had already gone through the liver, gone through a process known as conjugation to transform it from fat to water soluble so it could go out the urine. And then hence they collected the urine, dried it into a powder, made it into a tablet, and gave it to women. It turned out not to be the greatest, and the medroxyprogesterone acetate to be even less good, okay? It was bad, okay? So what did they find? That there was indeed a small, in this group that had the combination, a small increased risk of breast cancer, blood clots, strokes, and then later they did a separate later on study from the same group that found that the women over 65 had possibly an increased risk of dementia. Now, here's the thing. They took that data and then basically generalized it to all hormone types, all hormone doses, and like all women. And the FDA, in its unfortunate lack of wisdom for that, I'm not saying they always have no wisdom, but they didn't in this case, they put the black box warning. And then when the other part of the study ended that had only the Premarin, no medroxyprogesterone acetate, just the estrogen component, they added it to that as well because they felt that at the end of that study, they also had what? They had more problems with dementia in the older women over 65 and more blood clots and more strokes and more heart attacks. So the black box warning was assigned to all products that had any estrogen in it of any type. Now, the FDA did note that the only product studied was medroxyprogesterone acetate with conjugated equine estrogen, and they did make note of that, but nevertheless, it went on every product, every dose, every type. And this has been creating fear in providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, everyone who is writing the prescriptions, and the recipients of the prescriptions, the women patients. Because there's nothing like getting a prescription, going home, looking at the box, and seeing, oh my gosh, the warning on the box said, if you use estrogen alone, you have an increased risk of endometrial adenocarcinoma, that's uterine cancer. And no matter what, if you're using this product, you have an increased risk for cardiovascular disease events, heart attacks, and strokes. There is a probable increased incidence of dementia, and there is an increased risk of blood clots, and there's an increased risk of breast cancer. So how would you feel if nobody told you that this was a black box warning on the product you were buying and taking home to use, and you saw those warnings with a big black frame around it? You would be scared to death. And what if you're the provider? You might be scared, like, oh my gosh, this patient is going to be frightened, think I'm a terrible doctor, maybe sue me if they ever get any problem. So I'm not going to prescribe it. And that's what happened. No one was prescribing except, I was, I'm not saying no one, there were other doctors, but the prescriptions written plummeted, not just because of the study, but because of the black box warning that was placed on every product. Now, since then, there has been talk about, wait a minute, this isn't right, because the data that created this problem that evolved into putting this black box warning on these products, where's the data to show that they should apply to transdermal estrogen patches, to bioidentical progesterone, and even incredibly low dose vaginal estrogen products? So back in about 2000, I can't remember, it was 2016 or 2017, There was a presentation to the FDA. So this is now, well, not quite a decade ago. And back then, a presentation was made to the FDA to try to take away the black box warning from very low doses of estrogen products, which would apply primarily to vaginal estrogen products. If you bought an over-the-counter estrogen cream, for example, what's the dose? 0.1 milligram. That's an incredibly low dose. Now, there is no risk. That's the crazy thing. But even if there was a risk, which there isn't, which, we talk about, and I'll talk about more, even if there was a risk of all those bad things I mentioned, heart attacks, strokes, blood clots, breast cancer, and dementia, even if those risks existed, here's the thing, which they don't, but if they did, with the vaginal estrogen, with that tiny amount and comparable you're going to get from the vaginal ring, the Estring, that's the brand name, or with any of the little inserts, the little tablets, they're all comparably very, very low dose. They're so low that almost zero gets into the bloodstream. So it's not systemic. I mean, that's the good and the bad. You're not going to get benefit to your bones, to your brain, to your heart, to any other organ system except the genital urinary syndrome is going to be addressed. That means it will help your bladder and it will help the vaginal tissues. Now, that's not enough in my book, but it's still really important. Who wants to have frequent bladder infections, increased risk of incontinence, painful intercourse, vaginal infections, and pain, just generalized, discomfort? So that warning was placed and still remains on these incredibly low dose vaginal estrogen products. To me, that's criminal. The amount that gets into the body is pretty much unmeasurable. It doesn't get into the bloodstream. Now, what about other products? Should this warning, this black box warning, exist on anything other than the product that was tested? Well, probably not. But here's the thing. What happened when they had that meeting in front of the FDA, like whatever that was, 8, 9 years ago? So what happened? Okay. Well, what happened was the FDA said, no way, we're not going to take away the black box warning on even vaginal products, vaginal estrogen, because you can't prove, where's your clinical study to prove that those products won't cause harm? You can't just show that there is no harm from any evidence, no observational studies, no use studies. There's no level, there's no scientific method that could possibly cause these hormones given vaginally to create any of the problems that are on the black box warning. The FDA said, no, no, no. You must first prove. You have to have a clinical study that's large that will prove that those products don't do that. You can't just say, but it's never been seen. There's no mechanism. No, you have to prove it. So they've kept the black box warning on. Well, now a committee, I wish I were part of it, but I wasn't invited, maybe next time, went in front of the FDA and tried to make the case, and hopefully did. I do not know the outcome. Nobody knows yet. To say, let's get the black box warning off. Now, there was some very eloquent presentations concerning the low dose vaginal products, because it's crazy for them to have, even if you believed that bioidentical transdermal estradiol and bioidentical progesterone would cause those problems that were listed in the black box warning that I told you about. Even if you studied the data, why would you think that those products, which are very different from what the oral conjugated equine estrogen and the medroxyprogesterone product, why are you making a black box warning for items that were not studied? They were not part of that study. It would be as if you put a black box warning on products that were sort of related but not studied. It's completely inappropriate. But what's happened is that up till now, we'll see if it changes. The FDA said it doesn't matter that they're different. It doesn't matter. You have to prove with clinical data, that means human studies, that they don't do that. Well, nobody's been funding those studies. We even do have some studies that show no harm. We have the KEEP study. We even have, which unfortunately used oral estrogen, the ELITE study. They didn't show any harm. But nevertheless, those black box warnings are on transdermal estrogen, whether it's a cream, a lotion, a patch, a gel, and with bioidentical progesterone, that would also qualify for the black box warning if the progesterone were part of it in a combination, which there actually now are some combination pills. But let's take it apart. What if we took away the black box warning from the vaginal products to begin with? That is such a clear-cut case of inappropriateness to put it on a product that doesn't even get absorbed in any measurable way into the bloodstream to even cause any problems. And then what about transdermal estradiol? Why should it be put on that list and get the black box warning? It should not. I don't know if it's going to go that far to get it off of those products. I hope so, because as long as the black box warning is present, it's going to discourage many providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, naturopaths, any of the people who have a medical type of license that allows them to prescribe hormones. It's going to discourage many of them because, to try to explain to your patient why you're prescribing something that has these horrific warnings on them is not so easy for some providers to do. And the patients, if they're not forewarned and they didn't even know it, and then they go home and they read the black box warning, they're going to say, what on earth? Or even their partners will look and say, oh my gosh, I don't want you to take this stuff. Look at all the bad things that can happen to you. What if they happen to you, So we've got to get that black box warning off these products. What have I been doing? I've been saying they don't make any sense. I don't even want to keep saying that. I don't want to badmouth the FDA every time I write a hormone prescription, but that's what I have to do. Let's get this fixed. So we need to know, number one, a black box warning is the FDA telling the consumer and the doctor or the provider that this product is really dangerous, not a little dangerous, but potentially really dangerous, that it can cause major problems and maybe even life-threatening. So that is a very big deal. And they put it with a big black frame around it on the box and on the package insert on the label. My goodness, it is not feasible to miss it if you have your eyes open. So that's what the black box warning is. The black box warning for estrogen-containing products will say alone estrogen increases endometrial adenocarcinoma, and with or without progestin, but it will be including if there's a combined progesterone product, it says it increases or can increase the risk for cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. It may possibly increase dementia. It increases blood clots and breast cancer. That's the black box warning. It's on every product, including the tiny doses that are in the vaginal estrogen products. And so this is horrible. It really is scary for consumers. It's scary for the providers. So I'm crossing my fingers. I'm crossing all my fingers. I'm crossing every set of fingers that the FDA will take away this warning. If it only starts with the vaginal products, so be it. But hopefully it will apply to all of the transdermal estrogen products, and it should never be on bioidentical progesterone. It's not on bioidentical progesterone, but it is on if it combines with it. Now, I don't prescribe those anyway, but they don't deserve to be on it. Now, why shouldn't it be on transdermal estrogen? Can transdermal estrogen, estradiol, can that product increase heart attacks and strokes and dementia, blood clots, breast cancer? The answer is no. There's over 12 studies showing that estrogen lowers the risk of breast cancer by over 33%. The mechanisms that are triggered by estradiol, bioidentical transdermal estradiol, include increased production of the gas nitric oxide, which actually lowers the risk of blood clots by increasing the health of the lining of arteries called the intima. It lowers platelet clumping or aggregation, so it lowers the risk of spontaneous blood clots. It is wonderful. Nitric oxide makes arteries healthy, increases the functionality, the appropriate functionality of platelets. It's an antioxidant. Arteries are dilated. Blood is flowing readily. So it does not do that. It does not increase the risk of heart attacks. And it actually lowers the risk of blood clots. It's not dangerous, okay? Now, what about breast cancer? I already told you it lowers the risk of breast cancer. Estradiol increases the cohesiveness of cancer, even if it occurs. That's why women who do develop breast cancer, if they're on hormones, it doesn't mean you can't get breast cancer. It doesn't increase the risk, and it seems to lower the risk. But if a woman does get breast cancer and she's on the bioidentical hormones, she will have a better outcome for a number of reasons, one of which is that you're going to have a lesser chance of metastases because estradiol causes more cohesiveness of the cancer cells, so they're less likely to break off and start flying around the body as metastatic breast cancer. So it's actually really good, okay? So it lowers blood clots. It's healthy for the arteries. You're going to have a lower risk of strokes and heart attacks. Now, what about the brain? Estradiol is neuroprotective. It increases the health of neurons, the production of new neurons, neurogenesis, more synapses. It is neuroprotective. It improves vascular flow, so you're going to get less probability of vascular dementia. And now, can I prove everything with clinical studies? No, I can't. I am talking about the science of estradiol. Do I want to have clinical studies so I can say, look at this giant clinical study? You betcha I want the studies. And I am trying to get them going. I'm not just being inert. I'm not just talking. I'm not just spewing out hot air. I am in the process of trying to get these studies done and funded because I know that you cannot convince medical societies based on mechanisms and science or rodent studies. I know that. But we, women, in real life, in real time, have to make real decisions based on what we know. Remember, doing nothing is a decision. Not taking hormones, because I can't show you clinical studies to prove everything that I say, is a decision. And yes, I'm always very transparent. I know the science of hormones. I know what happens when you don't have them. I know the mechanisms for how they work in the body, but I can't create studies that haven't been done. We look at the KEEP study, okay? The KEEP study used underdosed estradiol patches. The levels achieved in the blood were below the levels that we need to have for optimal health. They stayed in the menopausal range. And so that's a big problem. In the ELITE study, they used a small dose, 1 milligram, of an oral estradiol pill, and then they used a very small dose of vaginal progesterone gel. So the people who designed the few studies that have been done didn't do them the way I would want them designed. They used the wrong product or the wrong doses still, but they did not show what? They didn't show any of the outcomes that were shown with the Women's Health Initiative. They didn't use medroxyprogesterone acetate and conjugated equine estrogen in the same doses. Now, the KEEP study did use medroxyprogesterone acetate, and it also used, it did use a very small dose of Premarin, 0.45 milligrams. But, and actually now I can't recall if it used medroxyprogesterone acetate, but it definitely used Premarin at 0.45 milligrams. But that's a lower dose. But even then, at that lower dose, it did not show an increase in harm. It did not show any of the bad things with heart attacks or strokes or blood clots or breast cancer. So that didn't show in the KEEP study, and it didn't show in the ELITE study either. So we do have some data to back up why we should not have that black box warning. Oh my goodness, I just hope the legacy, that unfortunate legacy of the Women's Health Initiative, can really start to fade away. It was the Women's Health Initiative that gave us the black box warning, and I hope so much that that black box warning will go away so that many practitioners and many patients will now accept hormones as what they are, something that really helps to keep the body functioning optimally. And hopefully they'll use, and we'll talk more about this in the future, the right doses and the right products. But we got to get rid of that black box warning because it has created so much harm over the last 22 years. Cross our fingers. Goodbye, black box warning.